Hey guys, Terry Red here, and in this video, we are going to be tackling a big topic. We're going to our Virtual Pinball Essentials, and we are going to be talking about the big monster that is Visual Pinball. There is a lot to cover in this topic because there's just so many parts to make this work, so I'm just going to dive right in. So before you're watching this video, you should have already watched my previous video, which is the Virtual Pinball Software Essentials Starter, which takes you through this guide here to install all the essential software you need before getting to this point. You should have went through this entire guide up to this point here and right there. And you shouldn't have gone any further than that for software install. You don't need to be doing Pinup Player yet because you have to make sure Visual Pinball is good to go, right? So, all right, so we're going to dive right in to that, and we're going to start talking about everything that's involved. So, this is your Visual Pinball. I'll just close this up for a second here. This is your Visual Pinball install folder. I'm just going to quickly go through what the files and folders are, and then we're going to talk about setting up our PinMAME DMD first, and then we'll jump into the rest right after that. So first things first, these are all the files. You're going to see some files in here that are not in your install. This is my test PC, so you're going to see duplicate files of certain things or files that are not part of a normal install that you can't get anymore. So if you don't see the same files in yours, don't freak out. As long as you followed that video guide and the wiki guide for the software, you're good to go. So first things first, in the main folder here, you've got all these executables. This is your Visual Pinball 10 program right here. This is the one we are going to concentrate on because, quite frankly, you should only be bothering with Visual 10 right now because most of the tables are being made for Visual Pinball 10 now. The older Visual Pinball 9 and PM5 tables, some of them are nice and unique, and you can't get those in Visual Pinball 10 or Visual Pinball X or VPX as we like to call it. So my recommendation is concentrate on Visual Pinball X tables first. And then when you are not doing anything else in your adventures, then you can maybe journey into Visual Pinball 9 and PM5, but we're not going to talk about that. So these other EXEs are for the older Visual Pinball programs. So we're not going to be talking about that. We're only talking about Visual Pinball 10. So these other files here, you don't have to worry about them. They're nothing that you have to mess around with. So up here, you're going to have a doc folder. For more advanced stuff, that's what this is for. So if you want to read up on that, that can give you more information. This one is not one you have to worry about. This is the music folder. So for some tables that you install, they may have music files. Now, the reason why they have separate music files and they're not part of the table file is because Visual Pinball does not handle MP3 files or OGG files. So it only handles WAV as far as I know. Maybe PCM, I'm not sure. So that's why they all have to be put into this folder. So for me, this is from a whole bunch of different tables. So if they have a music folder included with the table, then the files will go into here. They're not even organized. They're all just kind of all thrown into there. So it's kind of a mess. I don't like the way they do that, but that is what it is. The scripts folder, these are the ones that are installed with the installer. You shouldn't have to mess around with anything in here. Occasionally you might get a table that may have an oddball script like the FPVPX or something else odd that is not in here. That's fine if you have to install those. You shouldn't have to install any other files that are the same as the installer. So be careful about replacing any files in there. Very careful. Obviously, this is your tables folder. This is where you're going to have all your VPX tables. And you know they're a VPX table because they have a VPX file extension. So this is where the tables will go. This is also where the direct B2S backglass files will go. So if it says .direct B2S, that's where that file will go as well. And this is the table file here running on my cabinet. This is a direct B2S backglass running on my cabinet. So just so you understand what's what, when you run this table, it will automatically load the backglass. And you normally have the table named whatever you're going to name it, and then the direct B2S has to be exactly the same name for it to work. It won't load it up and have it start up automatically because B2S server has been updated to make sure that the files are exact matching. So make sure they match exactly. So that's what you're going to find mostly in here. you shouldn't really be seeing anything else except for the table files and the direct B2S files. Now, some people, for whatever reason, decide I'm going to put all my tables in their own individual subfolders, and I'm going to put the direct backglass files in those folders. So they'll have a folder named 24, and they'll put all the files for the table in there. You can do that if you want, but my God, there's no need to do that crap anymore. There's no advantage to it, and you're creating a ton more work for yourself. Like, I've been doing this for years, and I've had no need to do that. And I used to do that years ago. And yeah, it's just wasted time. Don't bother doing that, guys. So now you're going to see all these other folders here, the UltraDMD folders. These are also files that came with certain tables that use UltraDMD. Now, what is UltraDMD? Now, you can see, you can get an idea of how many I've got that use it, right? What is UltraDMD? UltraDMD is the DMD that is used for original tables. So this is an original table. It's a table that was made from scratch for virtual pinball. It's not emulating a real table like The Walking Dead is here. The Walking Dead is using emulated ROMs from the original game. PinMAME is emulating that, and that it's what's dealing with that. For the score DMD display on a table like this one here, it's using UltraDMD. And there's a good number of games that use that. So that's where those files will go if they are included and needed for the table. Now you're going to see the plugins folder. That was installed from the DUF, Direct Output Framework, when you did the full guide installed. So that should automatically already be in there. And inside there, you'll see the direct output. That's the DUF link. So what that means is that shortcut is going to link back to this folder here. So this is DOF. That's where DOF is installed, okay? So that just means that anything in this plugin folder will be used for direct output framework, for a B2S server, and this is just linking back to here. So that way when a table loads and it needs to use DOF for anything, then it will automatically know where the location of DOF is. That's what that's for. And you can see I have a Pinup player shortcut. That's also for eventually when you guys will install Pinup player, which normally goes to Pinup system, and the driver, the B2S driver, is located in here. So it just means that this is located from here back to there. That's why they're shortcuts. It's just easier that way. So instead of copying all the files into this folder, it's a lot cleaner and neater. And then that way, if you reinstall Visual Pinball, you're not messing around with your Pinup player files, and you're not messing around with your direct output files. It's just easier that way. So make sure you don't have any duplicates in here of anything. If you do, that will screw things up and it will not work. You cannot have a backup file or a folder with other backup files, only the shortcuts or the actual files, not both. All right, so I think that's everything that we got. Oh, and of course, your B2S server files are in here. By default, that's where they're installed, and I highly recommend you keep it that way. So if you need to change your size of your B2S backglasses, like this one here, then that's where you're going to do it. Now, if you have a cabinet set up and your screens are different down the line and you need to change resolution or anything else, then you just go click on this guy, and then you'll do that in here, and you'll change the resolution, the position of your backglass, and these other settings are for like additional digital displays. I've never had to use them in my backglass, so that's something that you have to play around with if you actually make use of that feature. I've never had to. Same with the playfield. Never had to use that myself, but some that's more for if you have additional displays like this here. Maybe the backglass will allow you to display like alphanumeric displays or other things like that. So that's what that's for. So I've never had to use that. So anyways, that's what that's for. If you have to make a change to your B2S backglass, you come back here and do that. So that's what that's for. And these are all the settings, the config files and everything else for that. So as you can see, I got a whole bunch of tables in here. There's way more than this out there. I only keep the ones that I will play. I don't get every single table out there. There's hundreds and hundreds of them, so it can get crazy, guys. So that's this one. So now we're going to go to the big folder. Well, actually, no. So I forgot we got these. So user, nothing that you guys need to worry about in that folder. We'll come back to the VPinMAME folder. That's where Visual Pinball MAME is, and any files associated or that use anything along the lines of Visual Pinball MAME are going in there. XDMD, that's the UltraDMD install files that go into there. So remember, UltraDMD was the files for displaying this guy here. So now that we've gone through all that, now that file, that's something I tested before. You guys don't have to worry about that. So don't worry about that folder. So Visual Pin MAME. So this is where a lot of files are. So I'm just going to quickly go through what these are. So you may not have all these. Don't worry if you don't. At some point, eventually you will. I'm just going to explain what they all are. So alt color, that's if you have any kind of a palette file. So a lot of these are old. I don't even use most of these anymore. But if you've got any kind of custom colorization for a DMD, so kind of like what you're seeing in here for this Walking Dead demo, you can get palette files for certain DMD ROMs, and they're helping to either patch the ROM or they use the palette file to colorize it in real time, and those would all go in here. Now, alt sound, that's an old format for pin sound. Now, pin sound is basically a program that will replace music and sounds in some real pinball machines, and it can be used for visual pinball as well. Now, the old method that they used to support was alt sound, and those files would go into here, but you can't really find those anymore because they've moved on to a newer version of Pin Sound Studio, and they want people to use that format instead. Artwork, nothing to worry about. Config, I'm not totally sure what this actually used for, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's game settings or not, but you'll get a whole bunch of these. If you have problems with a game not running right, sometimes you have to delete the file in there for the game. Folders, I don't think we have anything in there. Nothing in these guys you have to worry about, or this guy. Mem card, that's only for some pinball tables that maybe have a specialized hardware for God knows what, I don't know what. Nothing you guys need to worry about. Now this one here, NVRAM, this is where your high scores get saved. So this is kind of like acting like the configuration in the save state of the pinball machine that was kept by the batteries in your pinball. Your real pinball machine. So if you took the batteries out, then you'd lose your scores and everything else. So what this is, it's acting as if this is the save files of the real pinball machine. So this is where your high scores are going to be saved. So this may only be the high scores. It may be other stuff. I'm not totally sure. It may be settings like the factory service menu settings and everything else, and maybe the volume settings, either config or that or both. But your high scores for sure normally go in there. That's my own folder. Don't worry about that. Now these ones are only used if you've got a real DMD, and initially you would have copied the files from there into this main folder, but most of these are out of date anyway. So if you got like a Pin2 DMD, you're going to get the newer files from Lucky, and these ones might be up to date, but you're probably going to get newer files from VP forums anyway. So that's just an extra folder, I think. Now this is the big one, ROMs. So this is where the actual ROMs for every table goes. Now there's two main parts to every table. If it's an arcade emulated table, so something like this. You have the Visual Pinball table file, which we already talked about. And then you have the ROM file, which is what this is using for its programming and information. So you need both parts for any arcade emulated pinball game. So you can see I got a lot in here, a lot. Now, where do you get these guys? Well, all I'm going to tell you is there's like multiple sites out there, but the three main sites that you can get them, you get them one at a time. They're not going to give you like some mass download zip file or anything like that, but you can get them or update them. Mostly at VP Universe is a great site. You can see here you have different ones you can choose. You You can go to VPinball for not many, but there's some oddball ones here, and there's some custom ones that are in here as well, like the Tom and Jerry. And VP Forums, of course, has thousands as well. But again, they're not going to offer an all-in-one download. I know you guys are going to say, well, can't I just get them all in one download? No, you will not get them there, so don't ask. I'm sure you can find some other place to find them, but I'm not going to tell you where. But bottom line is, if you want to get them all, you're not going to get them at the main Visual Pinball forum sites. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So you get whatever ROMs you need for whatever game you need, and you put them in this folder. All right. And that's all I'm going to say. Samples, that's for any games that use a sound sample file replacements. Not many, if any, use that. Snap. Yeah, these ones you're not going to use any of these. So they're empty or not used. This one's more for dev. We don't even bother with that. So now we get down to these guys here. I'm only going to talk about the files that matter. And so the first ones we come to is these two here, DMD device and DMD device INI. This is the Freezy DMD files. This is the actual Freezy DMD file, the DLL file, kind of like the program. And this is how we configure it. Now, I talked about that in the install video before. If you went to my guide and you went down to DMDext Freezy, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this file here. All right. And I showed you how to install it and then how to configure it basically. So we're going to come back to that in a little bit when we absolutely set up our DMD. So now these files here, these are for Pinup Player, so that's not part of this video. This is also the Freezy files. Now this DMDext.exe, that's used only for Pinball FX3 or the Pinball Arcade. It's not used for Visual Pinball, so we don't have to worry about that in this video. Now, these other ones are mostly my own files, so you don't have to worry about that. I use those for testing. And then you're going to come down. This one here, the PinMAME EXE, you're not going to use that. You click on it. You don't use it for anything because it's not a graphic user type program. Now, this one here, again, you're not going to use it. You click on it. You're going to think, oh, I can run the games from here. No, this is just for the actual DMD or alphanumeric display, nothing else. So you're not going to use that. If you see this, Pro Pinball Slave, that's used for Time Shock. I think that's for DOF or the DMD. I'm not sure, to be honest. This is for, that is part of Pinup Poppers files for mirroring the DMD images. So that's what those files are for. And that's also part of that. The ROM updater, I've never actually used that, so I'm not going to tell you much about that. And all these guys down here are just additional files that would normally be there. You don't mess with those. So you're going to have two setup files here. All right. So the 64-bit one we don't even use because, quite frankly, we don't have everything running in 64-bit, so it's kind of not needed. So don't bother setting up the 64-bit version of PinMAME. This file here is our PinMAME. Now, it's already installed when you do the installer. However, we need to do a setup for it. And I'm bringing you here before even showing you Visual Pinball, the editor, and how to load tables. I'm bringing you here because everyone should go here first. So you're going to go and you're going to do setup. Now, it's already been installed, but if you click on install, it's just going to ask you, do you want to go ahead? Sure. It didn't actually do anything with the files here. It just actually installed it to the registry, and I'm showing you right here. This is the registry. If you guys don't know what the registry is, that's where almost everything in Windows is saved for configurations. So you can type regedit, and then you go here, and then you'll have to just navigate from HKey current user to software down to freeware. You go in there, and then you'll see Visual PinMAME. And then by default, you have nothing in there. You just got your defaults and the globals. Now, the defaults we haven't even done yet. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go in and do that right now. So we're going to keep this open so I can show you a couple things. But this is where all your games, the Visual Pinball settings for every single table go in here. All right. So you didn't have to install it, but it doesn't hurt if you do that. So you set up the paths. That's already done when it first got installed. So that should be no problem at all whatsoever. That should be good to go. Now, this is what we're going to do. We're going to set up our defaults. Now, what do we mean by that? So this is the default settings. We are not going to use these. We are going to change this so that you'll be set to go to use Freezy and the ideal settings that you want to use. Now, what we're changing here is what this guy is going to be using, the DMD. Wherever you wind up displaying your DMD, they're going to be using these settings as well as what we set in this file here. All right. So I'm going to tell you exactly what these are for and what you want to set them set at. So these guys over here, you only need to change this guy if you want for better resound sample quality. If your computer doesn't handle it very well and the sounds get all scratchy and really bad, then maybe set this back to 0. Alt sound. So that's pin sound. So if you want to use pin sound, like I mentioned before, that's the alt sound folder I mentioned before. If you have those files, they won't be included on the install. But if you know where to find some of those files, that's where they would go. Then you would have to enable it in the alt sound 1 mode, I do believe. Now alt sound 2 or 3. Alt sound 2 is used with Pin Sound Studio, the actual software program. So that's where you would make those changes. However, this is our default. We don't want that set on our default because every new game that we run is going to use these settings and then add it to here. And you're going to see how. All right. So these guys are okay. Over here, you want to enable the skip startup sequence. We want to use sounds. We want to use samples. We don't want compact display because we're not using PinMAME, the ugly old DMD. We're going to use the Freezy DMD. So we don't care about that. We don't care about double display size either. We do care about CRC errors because that's used for custom ROMs. Custom ROMs are what you use for like patching your music or for example, replacing sounds. It depends on the ROM that you're using. Now, in my case, I've done PuP-Packs where I removed the music from the ROM and there's no music in the ROM at all. And then Pinup Player is playing its own music instead. So if you make a patch or a modification to any ROM, you have to enable this to allow that ROM to be used. So you want cabinet mode enabled because that's going to get rid of the splash screens. So if you run PinMAME, it'll have a little splash screen come up. We don't want any of that stuff, so always leave that enabled. Now this guy here, show DMD display window. That is the ugly old PinMAME DMD. We are not using that anymore. I know I said it a million times, but we're not going to use that anymore. So we're going to keep that disabled. We are going to enable use external DMD DLL, and that's going to go back to, again, this file here and then this file here to display this nice DMD instead of the old PinMAME DMD. So this is what you want to have by default. Now you don't want to have colorize because it'll use this god-awful palette. And if you have anything in this all color folder that is really terrible looking, which, you know, there's a lot of junky palette files out there. Yeah, don't have this enabled by default. You can enable it on a per game basis after the fact if you need to for the games that do have patched colorized ROMs. So don't leave that enabled. So you can pick a default color if you want for the games to use if they don't specify a color. So if you want to change that, you can. And leave these guys as they are. Don't bother changing them. And that's it. This is exactly what you want for every setup, whether it's in a cab or a desktop. Use these settings for your defaults. Right off the bat, this is the first thing you guys should be doing. So now that's good. So now that we're done, I'm just going to quickly show you what the test is all about. So what this does is you can test any of the ROMs that you have installed here. Okay, now I got a whole mess of them, right? So I'm going to go to 24. So I know that one's handy and I know I have it. So what you do is you select a ROM. This is only the name, but this is the actual ROM. The zip file ROM name is over here. So if you want to try to start it and emulate it, or then you can. And that's what this is for. It's so that you can change some options very easily without having to run the table. So that's what we're going to do here. So and I'm going to show you why. So we're going to start. And then now this is the Freezy DMD, this guy right here, okay? So this guy looks nice and clean and beautiful. Big, beautiful dots, right? Look at that. You can even go really nice and big, and you can see what it is. So this is what we want. We want big, beautiful dots, crisp, nice and clean. PinMAME does not look like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this. Now, I'll point out, I just resized this, right? And I moved it around. Now, when I stop this, it's not going to remember those settings. The reason why is because the settings are actually in here. This is the Freezy DMD that we're using. The reason why that is held there is because you can customize everything in there. If you don't use the Freezy DMD, or other words, if the game did not use this, it used this guy instead, and you can have both running. You don't want both running, but you can have both running at the same time. In fact, maybe I'll see if we can do that, and I can compare. So let's see if we can get that to work for both of them. I don't know if it'll actually run both, but let's try it again. Okay, so now keep in mind, this has never been run before, so it's probably going to look really terrible. Okay, so not the best example, but I'll just give you an idea. So normally when you run PinMAME, you won't get this extra space and all that. It's just because the game hasn't been actually run yet, and it doesn't have any factory settings. So you can see how ugly that looks compared to that. So bottom line is, you're not going to use that ever. So we're going to stop that, and then we're going to make sure that is disabled. So now what's going to happen is every game that's run from this point on for the first time will use these settings here. So now if you go into the registry, if we refresh it, there we go. You can see we got 24 in there now, and all the settings for 24 are in here. So sometimes people will tell you you need to go to the registry to change some special settings for certain games, or they'll crash, or they'll have certain problems. That's in here. So you can find your way by, using this, just use that for reference if you have to, and then you'll find every game come up under here. All right. So if you have to make certain changes on a game per game basis, you can do it for the advanced stuff here, or you can come and do it in the tester here as well. Or you can do it in a game when you launch it, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So I know this stuff seems not very interesting, but I'm saving you a lot of work, guys, by doing it this way. So now every game that's run will be set up the correct way, okay? So the only additional thing I'll say is you'll have to come back to your DMD device INI, and you'll have to change the settings, the size, the width and the height, and your X and your Y for that DMD, because that's where the settings are kept. Okay. Now, some people will try to use the PinMAME settings. I recommend not doing that. This guy, where is it? Right here. Don't enable this one. It's just going to confuse the hell out of you. So I recommend keeping that on false. Now, you should already have this set up based on the previous video, but I'm just going to quickly say, you don't need to change anything by default. You want colorize to be true. You want a virtual DMD to be true if you don't have a real DMD. If you have a real DMD, that has to be false. Very important that you guys understand that. But we, in this video, are doing a virtual DMD for those of you who have a monitor, or you're just doing this on a single screen desktop. Stay on top. We don't need that. I've never had a need for that. Hide grip. Yes, we want that because we don't want the ugly little corner grip showing up. Ignore aspect ratio. We want correct aspect ratio, so keep that at false. We don't want to use the registry for PinMAME, but we do want to set up our position and our width and height. So that's going to be, where the DMD shows up. So for example, if I choose 200 now, all right, and I run this again for, say, 24. And, oh, maybe it didn't do it. Did it actually say that? Hold on a second here. Well, maybe it did, or maybe it did. I'm not sure. Hold on. Let's see why it didn't actually kick in. Oh, I know why. Okay, stop. Hit OK. I think we have to completely quit out and then go back in, I think. That's probably why I didn't do it. Let's try it again. Yep, that's what it was. So I see that's a good thing. I showed you guys that because you'd be like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? That's why. For PinMAME, you have to completely exit out completely and then come back in because it's technically still running, even though the DMD is not showing. So that's a good way. You can come here to try to figure out how to size and position your DMD. So you can just hit stop. You have to exit out completely, go back here and figure it out. Now, however you guys want to figure that out, it's up to you. But the only thing that's really, really, really important, I recommend for a desktop setup, just have it in the corner right here. It's super easy, you know, just have it go in by a couple pixels. And then whatever you do for the width, take this number and divide it by 4, and that's what you want here. DMDs are 4:1. Keep it at the proper aspect ratio. The dot size you can have at 1. Disable the real DMDs if you don't have a real DMD. The only one down here you have to actually care about is this one here. Pinup you want enabled, so that way when you do eventually install Pinup Player and you put PuP-Packs on, then it will make use of them if you have them. All right. It's not going to hurt anything if you don't even have Pinup Player installed, and it's not going to hurt anything if you have it installed but you have no PuP-Packs. It's just there, so that way the option is there. So if you want to use it, all right. But make sure you have that enabled. So that's it. So we've got our DMD set up. So that's a big portion right there, guys. Like, it's huge. You know, I know we talked a lot about that one. So, all right. So now that we've gone through the DMD portion, we're going to move to the actual Visual Pinball now. So I'm going to assume you guys have downloaded some tables. And if you're not sure where to get some tables, of course, the same websites. You can go to VP Universe. They'll have some tables here. Oh, where are we at? Right there. And you can download them, figure out which ones you want. There's tons of them. Same thing for VPinball. You'll just go here and tons of tables there. All sorts of tables. For VP10, just tons of them, like, you know, old, new, everything in between. And then, of course, you have, you can get tables here as well at VP Forums. And they got tons of tables here as well. So I'm assuming you've downloaded some tables. And I'm assuming maybe you've also downloaded some backglasses, some direct B2S backglasses. So you'll find those at the same locations, like, you know, for... let's see here. You go here at VPinball, you'll find them under the backglasses section. See, these are all the backglasses. VPU should have a lot because you got Wild there doing most of it. I can't remember if they'll show. Oh, yeah, right here, B2S backglasses. And you'll find a whole bunch here for all the different tables. So when you download those, you're going to download them and you're going to copy them into your tables folder. And then you're going to have them named the same, the B2S and the table. Now, if you're running this on desktop, only get like 1 or 2 direct backglasses for now until you determine whether or not you're going to be able to use them on a desktop. By default, most people do not. I will have another video that will show how to do that later, but that's going to be only if you're using Pinup Player and PuP-Packs. So understand, if you're doing it on a single screen setup, normally, you know, you would not be using it. Like in the case of WAS, well, you would use it with that one, but that's only because you're using Pinup Player and the backglass file combined. So in that case, you will have to use it. But normally people don't bother if they're on desktop, but that's another video. So, but we do need at least 1 or 2 to go through some configuration options. So, all right, so you got your tables, your backglasses. So now we're able to start Pinup Player. We're try Visual Pinball for the first time. Okay, so we can load it up either by double clicking on a table. So if I tried 24 and I double click on it and I've got a backglass file for it, it's automatically going to go into Visual Pinball and run it and start it up for you. And there you go. You can see here's the backglass file actually kind of popping on top, which is actually working surprisingly. That normally doesn't happen, but I've got stuff behind the scenes that's helping with that. So normally that would not happen. And then, of course, you can see the DMD up here and the tables here, and it's actually running just fine. So you want to insert coins. Normally it's your 5 key button, and you want to start a game. You push 1. And then your flippers for flipping, your enter key for the plunger, and the keys beside your flippers, your shift buttons are for nudging. And that's basically all you need to know. There's not really much else to that. So if you have the ROM, you have the table, and you set up your DMD, you should be good to go. If you have the backglass, maybe you'll be lucky it'll work on the right side, but normally it would not. So I'm going to exit out of that. And now normally if you just ran Visual Pinball on its own, it'll load up and it'll ask you, do you want to run a certain table? You could certainly do that as well. But for now, I'm not going to do that. Now, I recommend when you first run it, because it may not be set up nicely for you, do it in a smaller window at first, okay? Like something small. So this is your video and graphics options. This is going to be probably the first place you have to go. So here's my recommendation for settings, typically for most setups. Now we're just going to do it in a window for now, but I recommend having the reflected ball. Do not have this. This is terrible. The ball trails motion blur. Unless you're an old dude that can't see very well, you have no reason for that. It looks terrible. Ambient occlusion. This one's okay. This one, honestly, it doesn't really help to make it look nicer that much. And if anything, it actually kind of makes it look bad in some situations. And it's hard for performance. You have to have a nicer system. So I recommend not having that. Now, these two guys here, these are very high in performance. They demand high graphics card usage. So I would recommend not having those on by default. And then if you want to enable them on some tables, they will look great on a lot of tables, but not on all of them. So by default, this is what I recommend you guys have. Now for these two settings here, you want to have 1 and 1. It does vertical sync and it limits your frames. Having those both at 1 for 95% of the people out there works fantastic. Just make sure your graphics card drivers are not doing anything special for Visual Pinball. You have no need to touch anything for your graphics card drivers in Visual Pinball by default normally. Don't change anything. So if you have NVIDIA and you go to your control panel, you don't want to change anything in here under 3D settings. When we get there, you don't want to, go to program specifics and then make any changes for Visual Pinball. We don't need to do any of that. Okay, so make sure you don't have anything changed under that. So these guys are good. Make sure these guys are the same. You can enable this guy. For I think it's AMD. There's one setting in here, and I can't remember. I think it might be this one here. That you need to do to prevent certain, or maybe this one. I can't remember. It's one of these guys that's very good for AMD, and you might actually have to use it. It's probably this one here. The reason why is because it causes glitches or problems. So if you have an AMD GPU, then you'll probably have to enable that one. Now for full screen options, you don't need to touch any of this stuff anymore. Now I don't recommend doing this. Honestly, the support is not going to be very good either way. That's if you have a really nice TV screen with 10-bit monitor support, but chances are you're going to cause problems. Not worth it. Keep it disabled. This guy here, you would only use that if you're in a cab. If you're in a cabinet, then yes, a lot of people like to use it because it gives very good performance. And it keeps vertical sync. It helps the game stay stable, so it's really good. Now, if you are using, so only in a cabinet would you use that. If you're on a desktop, you're not going to want to have that necessarily enabled because what it's going to do is it's going to block off UltraDMD when it shows up, and it will also, when I get to that video, block off some layers of PuP-Packs if you want to use those on a desktop as well. So for desktop guys, you're not going to be using that. Eventually, you're going to have to turn it off. So that's my recommendation for settings. Keep the anti-aliasing off by default. You don't want to use that. The max textures, as long as you have a decent video card, you can leave on unlimited. If you have to, because you have a crappy video card, then you can reduce it to help out with how much usage it uses for your video card's RAM. This I always keep maxed out. This you normally don't have to enable, but if you're using a cabinet where you're going to change the view, then you would enable that for that. But otherwise, you normally shouldn't have to touch that. This is for the old school 3D stereo TVs. So unless you have something like that, you're not going to touch it. The automatic day-night cycle, that's going to change the visual darkness of the table, the global lighting for how dark everything is based on the time of day. I don't ever use that, so I normally don't bother with that. No anti-aliasing. Now this one here is used for if you are using a cabinet setup. So if you're using a cabinet like this, then the TV, the bottom of the TV is actually over here, and the top is over here. So it's going to rotate the game appropriately to make it work and line up like this. So that's what that setting's for. Only if you're using a cabinet would you enable that. And I'll show you the difference after. So once you got all these settings to start with, don't change anything after this. The only thing I recommend changing would be maybe anti-aliasing, brute force, and maybe these guys if your system can handle it. But otherwise, you don't really need to change much else on here. So I'll just try it in a smaller screen just to show you. So now we've got our default settings to start with, and then we're going to load a table. All right, we'll start you up. And there you go. You can see, so the direct B2S backglass is showing up because that's where I set mine up to be positioned. Remember I showed you that earlier, the B2S settings, right here when you clicked on that guy. So these settings are making this guy show up here, okay? For this one, this is the table. So because it's in windowed, I'm able to move it around, and we have our DMD here. So you can see we got 3 different elements working here. Now, if you've got a cabinet, you're going to have this guy positioned back there. If you are not using a cabinet, let me get you down there, then you may or may not be using this guy. Don't assume you will in a desktop setup unless you're going to do some special stuff, which I'll talk about in another video. Your DMD, keep it up there. You may have to size it once your table is full screen. So once you know everything's going good here, then you can go back and change it to full screen. All right. So change your graphics to windowed full screen. Now here, I'll try running in force full screen and see. Actually, you know what? No, I won't, because this is my recording will probably screw up. So if you go into force full screen, it's going to block out other things. If you're using this in a cabinet, that's fine. You want to make sure it's the proper resolution and refresh rate. But if you are not using that, then it's just going to run on your desktop in a full screen windowed mode. And there you go. So see, you can see the backglass that time got hidden out, right? So normally that's what would happen. So, and then again, we can start our game up. And there you go.
Following takes place between 6 a.m. and 7.
Now, some games, when you load them up, will do factory restored settings and other things. You're going to have to mess around with keys for the menu, the service menu for each game. So what that means is when you load the game up, you're going to use the keys on your keyboard by default, which is like your home and insert, delete, page up, page down. Those are going to be the ones to act like you're opening and closing the coin door. So I'm going to hit end. Oh, sorry, I hit I hit the wrong one. I hit home, and home is the slam tilt button. So we obviously didn't want that. Well, that's actually kind of funny. Okay, I've never seen that before, but okay. So don't hit home. So sometimes so the 4 buttons to operate your service menu are 7, 8, 9, and 0. So I just went into the service menu with 0, for example, and I can navigate through that with the other 4 buttons, the 7, 8, 9, and 0, or your 1 button. It's different for every manufacturer. But what I'm trying to show you here is that you can adjust volume. That's with 9, for example. And then you have 8 to go back down. So sometimes you may have to do that because the game won't sound very loud. And then you come back out of the menu if you have to. You can go into the diagnostics and change things, so that's all this stuff is for. You can mess around with all sorts of stuff. But then 7, 8, 9, 0 are the 4 main buttons. And then you might have to use 1 the start button to mess around with other settings. So that's normal stuff. It's something you guys are going to have to play around with. I'm not going to get heavy into that, but some games require you to mess around with the factory default settings and other things to get the game to work correctly. So again, this game is working fine, so we can exit out. So I'm going to just go through and talk about some of the menu settings here. So obviously we did the video and graphics, so it's running fine. So I'm not going to change anything here. This is a good starting point. Only change these guys if you feel your system can handle it. Same with the anti-aliasing here. This one is not really worth it unless maybe you're in 4K, but in HD, it's just going to make it look fuzzy. I wouldn't recommend using that. All right, so the options we have here are audio options. So normally, you would not change any of this unless you have a surround sound feedback. That means that you have a 5.1 or a 7.1 channel sound setup in like a pin cab for surround sound feedback. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to change that. And if you don't know what that is, well, that's a different video altogether. Just Google SSF surround sound feedback, and then you'll find the information at one of the forums. So you'll just leave that on your normal 2-channel for a desktop setup, unless you have a 5.1 or a 7.1 setup with your PC, which I actually do. That's why mine's set up like this. Otherwise, you would not change that. And this is the video card or the sound card that you would actually output your sound on. This is for just backglass specific sounds. This is for generic sounds, like your mechanical sounds and all that kind of thing. But by default, just leave it there unless you're doing surround sound feedback. All right, so our editor UI options, that's just for advanced stuff. If you're going to be doing any kind of editing with tables. Now, this one down here, that's the ball controller. Only enable that if you are going to use the ball controller to mess around with, certain things. Like maybe you want to do DOF or screw around with the game. So I'll show you. If that's enabled, then you can drag around the ball with the mouse by holding down the left mouse button. You can drag him around, leave him in a spot. He'll follow you, or double click, and then he'll instantly appear wherever you double click. All right, and then if you want to disable that, left flipper. Okay, so only enable that if you're going to do like some kind of advanced editing or testing or anything like that. Otherwise, don't enable that. Configuring your keys. This is where you configure everything for your controls, whether it's keys, buttons, a slider potentiometer for a plunger in a cab. All your controls are configured here. I'm not going to go through that because that's kind of self-explanatory. You guys can figure that out. The only other options you have here are the DOF options. So if you have all this fancy stuff in a cab, then you can choose whether to have the sounds or the DOF, or both, or SSF. So that's what all those settings are about. That's for cab stuff. So if you're a cabinet owner and you've got the hardware, that's where you're going to change it so that you can have only DOF or your solenoid or your feedback from your hardware. The sounds only, both of those. That would be configured here for most VPX table options will support that. Not all of them will, but that's where you would do that. And then same thing here. If you for some reason wanted to disable B2S server for whatever reason, when you launch a table, you would do that here as well. But all these other options are mostly just standard control options. I would recommend just doing your normal buttons. If you have to change them in here, if you're using a keyboard keys, you don't need to change them. So again, that's pretty standard stuff. You don't need to touch this one at all. That's for advanced stuff. Again, you don't need to touch that. Don't need to touch that. This is just if you're editing the table. Now this one here, you have, again, this is all just table editing stuff, so you don't need to touch any of that. But this one obviously is to play the table. Same thing as clicking the button here or pushing F5. But if you do this one, F6, this is important to know. This will allow you to change the POV of the table. And I'm going to launch it right now. So you're going to see that it's got all this extra stuff on here. Now you can't play the game right now because you're in the camera edit mode. So what this means is you're going to use either the shift buttons to change the value of whatever is showing up here, or you're going to use the control buttons to change the options. So mainly you want to use it for POV. So if you do shift, this is what it's going to do. So if you want to change your view of the table to be closer or whatever you want, that's all done in here. If you want to change other options, you hit the control key. And then you can see here, I'm going through different options up there. All right. If you want to do X scale, you can change that. If you want to do Y scale, you can change that. So all those options are in there. The only ones I recommend you guys ever messing around with are X scale, Y scale, and the X offset, Y offset, but not the Z offset and not the Z scale. You shouldn't normally have to touch the Z scale, Z anything. Normally, I would recommend not touching it unless you really know what you're doing. And inclination is basically the first one that you get. When you field of view, that's kind of like changing the lens for your camera. So you may not want to mess with that one much. It can be kind of freaky on the eyes. But yeah, layback is also another one that can actually have another effect. Again, though, if you want to reset, push 1. It'll put everything back to normal. So my recommendation is just mess with the layback. Or is it the layback? No. We don't want the layback. We want, not the layback, sorry. Only mess with, inclination. Inclination is that one there. That's good for desktop views. That's the only one I would really bother with for desktop view. Now, if you're using this for a cabinet view, then it's X scale, Y scale, X offset, Y offset. And I'll show you that in a second there, as if you're using it for a cabinet. So those are the main things that you guys would care about. And what are we over here? So if you make changes to the table, then you would save it here, obviously. Now the import and export, the only thing you're going to even be bothering with, unless you're a table creator, is a POV. Now, what is a POV? Well, a POV is a file that keeps all the settings that I was just playing around with when I hit F6, the camera view. Any changes you make to those can be saved not just to the table, but also to a file. Now, why do you want it in a separate file? Well, maybe you just want to be able to use it with a table without having to make changes to the table itself. Like maybe your buddy's like, oh, I like the way yours looks. Can I have that? But you don't want to send them the whole table. You can just send them the POV file. And then what happens is you would save that POV file. Well, here, actually, I'll do it right now. Let's just say I made some, well, here, I'll do a couple things. I'll first show you the cabinet view, and then I'll make some changes, and then I'll save it. But I gotta make sure it's actually gonna load up first. Okay, so it won't. So if you want to change to the cabinet view, you have to exit out and go back in again. So now I can run the table again, and it's going to be in a rotated cabinet view. So I'm just going to show you the difference here. So now you can see it's actually showing up as if we were going to use it in a cabinet setup. Now this normally would not be there, and this normally would not be there. You would have those guys, set up on your cabinet like you're supposed to on the second monitor and the third monitor as you would need. So this is what you normally have in a cabinet view. All right. So that's what that one option here is for. That's the only thing. If you're a desktop user, you never use that. So what I was going to show you was if you want to go and change your point of view, you do F6. And it's the same thing I was telling you before. All the options are still there. So you would do this while you're in your cabinet, unless you can do it at a desktop and then, move the cable to your cabinet afterwards. But by default, inclination comes up. So mess with inclination first and see, if you like that the way it is. Or if you want to change the size settings, then I highly recommend doing only X scale, Y scale, X offset, Y offset. Z, don't touch the Z unless you really know what you're doing. So you can see that's the offsets for Y, X, and then our scale. So X scale, Y scale. And those are the only ones I recommend you guys messing with. So when you're done making any changes to your POV, then you exit out of the table, and then you can either save the table and it will retain those changes, or you can export to a POV. And then what that's going to do is it brings you to your tables. And what I recommend you doing now, it doesn't show your table files, but yeah, I guess it doesn't. So what you can do is you can enter. Let's see, will this work? Yes, it will. So just put in the asterisks and hit enter, and it's going to show all the files, right? So what you do is you click on the table that you want it to be used with, and then what it's going to do is you just make sure there's nothing on the end, and then you hit enter, and then now it created a POV file. And if you go to your tables, there it is right there. So a .pov is used. So now if I exit out of this table, I don't want to save those settings. All right. So now if I load the table now, because it's named exactly the same as the table settings are not altered. It's just going to use these settings when it loads the table. So if I load the table and run it, now it's automatically used that POV file settings and it's good to go. So the whole point of using that file is, let's say you get updates to this table like 10 times after this. Well, instead of having to change your POV settings over and over and over again for every new update to the table, you just export it to that POV file. And then when you update the table, you just make sure the new update has the same file name, and then it's automatically going to work with your POV. So that's what that's ideally used for. So, and you can use that for desktop view, not just cabinet, but that's more ideal for cabinet views than anything else. So yeah, and I think that's the main stuff right there. Like I know this is an extremely long video, but there's a ton of stuff that we had to cover. But that's the main basics. I can go through some extras. When you have a table loaded, if you don't like how bright or dark it is, then what you can do is, let's see, you click on options, and that brings this guy up here. So then what you do is you find this day and night cycle. So what you do is you make sure this is actually enabled, and then you would then cycle this down. If you want it to be super dark, you make it more nighttime. So, and if you don't like that, then you can increase it really high, and then just keep trying it until you find what you like. Now, it also depends on the lighting of the table. So you can see it's much brighter. So you could do that on a per table basis. All these are per table options. Now, this is a big one. Remember the graphic settings I showed you? Here. Now, you can have separate settings that override this on a per table basis, and they're saved with the table. So see here, anti-aliasing, post-processing, ambient occlusion, screen space reflections, the VSync settings, the details. All those are right here, and that is saved with the table. So if they're set at defaults, then that means it's going to use whatever was here. If you go in here and you make changes, and then you save the table, then what's in there will override what's in here. So understand, if you make changes here and the table is running like absolute crap, then go to these settings here, click on options, go over here and check, because maybe they've got, like, you know, anti-aliasing turned on, post-processing turned on, like the super high quality reflections are on. So double check that stuff to make sure that it's using the default for your VSync to make sure that's working right. So double check this stuff for a table if it's not running correctly. Or if you yourself want to keep these as your default, but then you find a table will actually work really well with the extra options, but most of the other tables won't, then you can do this as well on a per table basis. It's pretty handy. So that's that. Now, all this other stuff is really advanced stuff. Like, unless you're into editing tables and creating tables, you're not going to touch any of that. So Yeah, so let's oh, that is one other thing I did want to show actually. The settings of B2S. Now this is important because eventually this may come back and become a pain in the butt for you. So I'm just going to make this smaller. Hopefully it'll show up correctly. All right, and I'll just make these guys nice and small. So this table has the direct B2S backglass, right? So now let's say you were on a cabinet and you had to make settings to this. You wanted to, like, it might show speakers or something else showing up, and you don't want those showing up. Like in my case, in my cabinet, like I don't have a square screen. I have a 16:9 screen, so I don't need the speakers because my speakers are down here. So that's why I don't have a speaker image on there. So if you want to get to the settings of this B2S backglass, you have to have it show up, and then you have to be able to get your mouse over top of it, and then you right click. And then these are the settings for B2S server. Now, some of these are per table or per individual table and backglass settings. Some of them are global and universal. So I'm just going to talk about a couple things, but the important things we have to talk about is this guy here. You want this guy not enabled. You want him like that. That's the one that was part of the installation for DOF. DOF was trying to change this so it wouldn't come up. Now, I already had mine set up, but we don't want that enabled. What that means is if we don't have a backglass, it's going to pop up with an error every time you load the table because it's looking for a backglass and it can't find one. So we don't want that enabled. And by default, that's on. It's actually kind of annoying. Quite frankly, that should be off by default. So you want to make sure that's off. You want to make sure this is enabled because if it gives you the option, 2 plugins that you'll probably wind up using, DOF, obviously, and Pinup Player when you eventually install that. So when you click on plugin settings, if both of those were installed correctly, and I showed you where they go, right? Remember I mentioned that? They go, give me a second here. In your plugins, your Visual Pinball Table folder, and then plugins. And they were right there. Remember the shortcuts I showed you before? That's what these guys are. These guys are just your plugins for B2S server. So Pinup Player is working fine. DOF is working fine. So that's what that's about. So those are the essentials. If you don't have Pinup Player installed yet at this point when you're watching this video, that's fine. You'll come back here to check this at some point. So even if you're a future pinball player or FX3 player, at some point you're going to have to get at least one table, one backglass, and go into these settings for, just to have a proper setup. So other things, you can click on this to try to bring this to the front, but it may not still work. That bring it to the top means it's going to try to bring it in front of the window, the other windows, but it may not work. So by default, that's left off because we actually want it pushed back because of PuP-Packs and other things normally. So these options here are for the grill, the DMD and the B2S DMD. So sometimes they are built into this. The DMD may also be on there. The grill may be shown. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to change that's already on there. Good. And I'm going to change that to be, okay, so that is visible. So we're going to change that just so you can see. And I'm going to change this as well. So we're going to restart the table. And we're going to exit out. And then we're going to go back in. All right, so there he is. All right, so now you can see it's got speakers. And it's got a spot for the DMD. However, I don't think it's got a DMD displayed on this one. So I just wanted to show that because even though I only have a 16:9 screen, it'll make it all fit automatically. Now you're only going to use that setting for speakers if you have a square backglass on a cab. That's the only time you're really ever going to bother with that. So by default, if you're using direct to backglasses and you've got a 16:9 screen, then you want to make sure that the plugin settings, or not the plugin settings, sorry, you want to make sure that for this game, the grill is hidden and the DMD, well, you can leave that on standard unless one shows up. By default, you don't have to mess with that because unless the backglass has one, it's not going to be an issue. Because sometimes they have alphanumeric displays, and you want those to actually show up, and that's what will control those. Is that so? Those are the only main things. These other ones, that's only for advanced stuff. If you want to change how fast animations happen and that sort of thing, unless you're going to get heavily into that, you shouldn't even have to touch any of these normally. Now, sometimes they have alt modes, so you can choose a different mode for the backglass, and it'll do different animations instead of the standard one. But this one doesn't support that. And I think that's it. Now, more. Yeah, that's more of the advanced stuff. You guys don't need to worry about that. And that's it. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. All right. So, all right. So I'm gonna just quickly, so you guys can see, I'm gonna try a table that does not have a backglass, so that you can see it come up with that error. I get something that doesn't have a PuP-Pack as well. Geez. Okay, there we go. Baraka. We'll go that one. So there's no. I'm pretty sure I do not have a backglass for this one. Okay. So see, it's giving an error because it can't find a backglass. All right. So that's why we want to change that setting. But here's the kicker. You have to have a backglass, at least one of them, to change that setting. So, you know what I mean? You may get that error when you try running a table the first time. Well, you have to have a backglass so that you can get to that menu to disable that error. It's kind of ridiculous, but that's what DOF was trying to change by default. But it couldn't do it because it didn't have a configuration file to change. So it's kind of silly. So if you get that error popping up, don't freak out. It's actually covered on the Pinup install wiki under troubleshooting. But get a backglass for at least one table, and then you can get to that menu and disable it. Now, this is what an alphanumeric display will look like on the DMD as well. That's normal. That's the way they normally look. Now, you can disable that if you want and use the original display if you want, but I think Freezy's going to have newer versions that look much nicer than this. So we can exit out of that. And just when you thought I was done, yes, guys, there's a couple other things I forgot to mention. So I wanted to bring them up, little things, but they can save you a lot of time. So I wanted to get them thrown in here before I put this video completely together. So we were talking about the direct B2S backglass settings and how you can change it so that it shows the grill or gets rid of the grill. By default, they will all actually. This is where I picked up one of the actual tips actually that I'm going to tell you about. By default, the grill will always be showing up for every single one of them, and that would honestly get really annoying. So when you load up a table, all your backglasses will show up with that grill on there by default. So it's actually going to be. We'll put those back on. It would actually be visible by default. And every single one of them, you would have to go in and disable it to get rid of them. Now, imagine if you have 100, 200, 300, 400 tables, and you had to go in and click them every single time just to get rid of that, that little setting. Because you don't need that, right? If you got, say, a cabinet set up, like this, you're not going to use the speakers. You're just going to use just the actual backglass part, right? So instead of having to go into every single one of those, there's actually a handy little tip I found. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that we have a brand new config file. So this is where your B2S server is. This is where the settings are all stored for all your grill settings, your light settings for every single backglass for every single table. It just stores them under the ROM name and then sets them all there. So, one, you could always just, if you want to get rid of all the settings, start from scratch, you could just delete that file. And there's a handy little setting that I don't know if it's a glitch or not, but when you go into your B2S setup, for all this normal stuff, if you put this as 1, normally it's a 0. But if you put it as, say, 1 in X, that's enough to get rid of all your grills on every single backglass by default when they load up. So even if that's only a temporary setting, because maybe you need to change that down the line for something, at least every time you load up your backglasses, they're going to be automatically with no grill instead of you going in there and changing that for every single one of them. Take it from someone who did it that way back in the day. I went and changed every single one of those stupid things while sitting at my cab. Yeah, work smart, not hard is the tech model. So as you can see, it even though I got rid of the config file and started from scratch, it's going to get rid of that, and it's good to go. And I think I don't think I have. Let's see if I have any other B2Ss in here. I think I just got like WAS and that's it. I think. Hold on. Yeah, just WAS and Beatles, and those aren't examples I can use. All right. So yeah, but anyways, that's just a little handy thing. So you might want to try that when you're first installing, and that way all your backglasses are not going to have the grill, unless of course you want the grill and you have a square backglass screen. Then of course you don't care. So the other thing I was mentioning before was I remember how we had our PinMAME settings here. So I've ran a few different tables, and they're showing up. You're going to have all of them show up eventually. It's going to be a ton, right? So I don't think I went over it, but there's a certain setting that you'll want to, if you can. I don't think the default gives you the option, and I'm not sure if you can even add it to the default. It's the direct draw option, DDRAW. This guy here. So this guy is 1 by default on every stinking table. And I'm not sure, I can't remember how to disable it by default. If you do a search, I'm sure you guys will find the answer because I've done it before. But if you change it to 0, that will prevent a crash if for whatever reason you're running a Visual Pinball table with exclusive full screen on. Where are we here? Yes. So if you have this on, but DDRAW was still at 1, then, and you're not using the Freezy DMD, you're using just a normal PinMAME DMD, it will crash. The table will crash. And if you're in a cabinet like this, and you've got exclusive full screen, then what happens is you can't see any of the prompts, the errors, nothing. They're all hidden, which is the whole point of exclusive full screen. So as an example, if you have that enabled, then any of those settings where when you launch a table and you want to get to like the PinMAME menu, like this, you won't be able to see that with this exclusive full screen on. So that's something else you guys need to understand. So that's a big thing. When you're in a cabinet and you're using exclusive full screen and you want to get to your PinMAME settings, you can't. So you're going to have to either switch it out of exclusive full screen temporarily or go to the PinMAME setup program and get to it that way. But that's a really important thing that you guys need to understand. So if you're hitting keys and you can't see anything popping up, remember exclusive full screen will stop that from happening. And if there's any errors that pop up, you won't see them. So you'll launch a table, it may lock up and freeze, and you might think, oh, what the heck is going on? And if you're using a front end like a Pinup Popper and you launch a table and it locks up, but you don't see an error, you're thinking, oh, well, it must be the damn front end that's causing the problem. But no, it's not. It's the table that's causing the problem. So these are little things that you want to pay attention to. So that's another reason why you want to use the Freezy DMD, because it avoids that altogether. So you don't have to deal with changing this setting whatsoever on any table, and it's not a problem anymore. So that's a big deal. Now, this is one that comes up. Some people talk about this 1891 JIT. Now, this is only for like the newer Stern Sam tables. So you don't want to mess with that unless you absolutely have no choice. Some tables give problems. Now, I know with The Walking Dead, some people tried changing it, some people didn't. You'll find the DMD will run slow. Eventually, the table might run slow and maybe crash. The problem is everyone's hardware is different. So that's a setting that some people recommend to change. I recommend not doing it at all unless you've ran the table and it just has a slowdown problem, or you have other issues, it's crashing. Try going in and changing that only at that time. So changing that to in decimal to 0 if you have to, but otherwise don't change those settings. But those are the only two main ones that are in here that you would ever mess around and deal with. And I wanted to take the extra time to talk about that because a lot of people will bring that up on occasion. If you're on Windows 7, you tend to see more problems with this. With Windows 10, it's pretty rare to actually see problems with that. So I just wanted to bring those two things up because for Stern Sam-based tables, and if you don't know what a Stern Sam-based table is, Google it and you'll get a list of all the tables that are the Stern Sam-based system. They're the ones that tend to have problems with this more than anything else. So that's it, though. So DDRAW, avoid that problem by using the DMDext Freezy DMDs, and avoid this problem by, using Windows 10, because everything, quite frankly, seems to run better on Windows 10. That's no joke, guys. If you don't know for sure which one to go with, you're debating 7 or 10, go with 10. You'll have way fewer problems. You'll be way more up to date. And there are ways to stop the updates on Windows 10 if you really want to, if that's your concern. But I've been using it for years now, actually, and it's been fantastic. I've had no problems with Windows 10. Occasionally they'll push out an update, and I've allowed all the updates. Occasionally they'll push out an update, but sometimes you just have to reinstall your GPU driver. You're probably going to have to do that every so often anyway, so it's not a big deal. So yeah. That's another extra tidbit I threw in there. So, all right, guys, I wanted to pop something else in here really quick. I wanted to show some tables with UltraDMD and with Pinup Player, what they're going to look like, how to configure the UltraDMD portion, and also just what a Pinup Player based table looks like. Now, the difference between a Pinup Player based table and a typical Visual Pinball table is it requires Pinup Player to be installed. You have to have it installed. There's no choice in the matter. So that's not the same as using a PuP-Pack with a table. A PuP-Pack is very much like a video version. Well, this is stranger. This is what I'm going to load up here, is this guy here. But a PuP-Pack is going to be basically like a video version of a B2S backglass. If you go to my channel, geez, you're going to see, a million of them, like Tron here, So this is the normal table running with a PuP-Pack. And the way that, just a real quick recap, for a PuP-Pack, they typically will have to watch the DMD images and react to that to trigger videos while you're playing the game or music or anything else, just like you're seeing here. Okay, so that's a PuP-Pack. We're not talking about that. We're talking specifically, because those are totally optional. We're talking specifically about a PuP-based table where you have to use Pinup Player, you have to have it installed, you have to have it set up. So I'm just gonna go through and show that really quick. And UltraDMD is something separate altogether. A lot of original tables use UltraDMD for the score display, but it's kind of old now, and it's kind of showing its age. So now guys like Scotty Wick have moved away from UltraDMD, and now he's moving over to using Pinup Player, because not only is it much better, you can do way more with it. You can have videos, animation, nice fonts, all sorts of really cool stuff with it. All right, so I'm going to just do a quick little demo here after this thing actually gets up and going. I kind of screwed things up here. Hold on. Come on. There we go. All right. I had the ball controller on, so that's why it got screwed up. All right, so top left here, what do you see? This is UltraDMD, all right? I've talked about that before. So this table gives you the choice of using UltraDMD as well as the PuP-Packs. That was just an extra option Scotty added, but you still require Pinup Player to play it. So I want to make that very clear. Okay, so those guys who are resistive to wanting Pinup Player for tables, well, you might want to get used to the idea of using it because a lot of great tables are coming out with it as a requirement and you are missing out. So I'm just going to show real quick, what this table's like. So I'm just going to drag the ball around a little bit, but so the music, for example, that's Pinup Player right now that's playing that. It's controlling it. And all of this is done through the table script. All right. So you can see on the top right there, the videos are all controlled by Pinup Player. The overlay for the frame, the scores on the left, the right, the information, the text, all of that is Pinup Player. So in this table's case, you have to have it installed. There's no options, guys. And it's honestly, it's very much worth it. You're just going to miss out. And you can use it on desktop and a cabinet. Desktop requires a little bit more configuring, but it is possible. I'll cover that in another video. But you can see, so now for UltraDMD, if you need to set up the size and position, sometimes you have to go into the table script to make some changes. Most of the time, that's not the case. You just have to go to the UltraDMD DMD window, right-click, and you get the settings popping up. Okay? And then you choose your size over here, and then you would choose your color for the default color, and click full color because you want to make use of that, right? Some they can have videos on UltraDMD, but they're only at 128 by 32 resolution. No matter what videos are actually used, you only get to see it in 128 by 32 because the idea is it was meant to also work with real DMDs, right? And that's what this option here is for. If you didn't want to have this displayed for any reason, you could click on that and it would always hide it. And that's ideal for real DMDs. So if you're using virtual DMD though, and you want to see it, then of course you want to have that enabled because this is a global setting, not a per table setting. So you hit OK, and that's it. Now it came out of focus. Oh no, actually, I think what I did screwed that up. Oh no, it's there. Okay, I wonder why it's hidden. That's weird. Maybe it just has to have something trigger. Oh, that's why. Okay, you just have to have something trigger it. That's all. So, and you can see the issue here where sometimes windows overlap one another when you take focus. So that's why I'm going to have to do a separate video to show you guys how to play these on a desktop view. But I just wanted to show you real quick. That was an example of a table using both UltraDMD and Pinup Player. So this is Pinup based only. Okay, so I just wanted to show that example. Now I'm going to show you another example that's kind of an even more stranger combination. And that would be, well, here. Number one rule of Visual Pinball, always close out the editor completely before trying another table, because sometimes it just will crash or not work. It's just a memory limitation, old programs being updated. These are 32-bit programs, so we're kind of pushing them to their limit. So good habit to be in, guys. So I'm just going to run this one now. This is Masters of the Universe to VP conversion. And this one has a PuP-Pack that is not required. It's also an original table, which means it doesn't use a ROM of any sort. And it uses UltraDMD. And it also now supports PuP-DMD displays. So this one's got a mixture of everything. So therefore, it's not PuP-based. The PuP-Pack is still optional, even though it's not a ROM-based table. I basically just added DOF trigger commands to the table to make the videos work. So that way you can run the table without the PuP-Pack if you want. But if you want to run, you have a choice of, in the table script, you have a choice of UltraDMD, the Pinup Player DMD, or the larger size post DMD. So I'm just going to run it with UltraDMD at first so that you guys can see, and then I'll show you the difference. All right, so you can see the backglass is up and running, table's running, And we got the topper, and we've got UltraDMD right there. So this is just a nice example of you know, how you can kind of have everything on one. Now it's not the same as, you know, having a table like Stranger Things. That's designed for PuP, and that's very different than what I did here. You know, this is just a nice extra add-on. It's all it is. And actually, I think I might have screwed it up. Hold on. Oh no, I didn't. Okay. So, as for example, when I hit the flippers, you can see the lightning reacting. That's every time you hit the flippers, it does that. So you can see videos get triggered. And in this case, the topper videos are showing the text.
We've done it!
All right, so now I'm going to change that up. And I'm going to change it in the script to be PuP-DMD. And you can see the big difference between what UltraDMD looks like and what Pinup player scoring looks like. I'm going to try doing it full screen. It should work for this one. It should. Well, sorry, a border. Okay, see? That's what I'm talking about. You have to close out VP and reload the table again. Always a good habit to be in because you'll save yourself a lot of headaches. If you're using it with a front end, then that's normal. You'll just be closing it out every time you exit the table anyway, so it works perfect. So I'm going to try running this as in borderless full screen, not normal full screen. That's a big difference between the two. For desktop, you always want to try to use borderless full screen for your options, or windowed full screen. It's the same thing, right? It just means that it's not going to be exclusive. It's not going to take the whole display and use it for itself and exclude everything else out. Oh, I forgot to change the options, darn it. All right, well, we'll see if it runs again this time. Any changes you make in the table script, you have to save the table, obviously, for it to remember that. So let's see if she actually runs again. Okay, we're lucky this time. Okay. So we'll wait a moment. Hopefully everything pops up. All right, so we have our initial stuff coming up. The other videos are not showing up yet because they're kind of hidden behind the window. And again, this is what I'm talking about, that PuP-Packs may not work initially for all tables at first. I'm going to do another video that talks all about that. But there you go. Everything kicked in now. So now you have everything displaying. So you got your PuP-Pack on the right side, you've got your topper here, and you've got now the Pinup player DMD display on the top left. So as you can see, it's way nicer looking. You could have animated videos in the back, anything that the Pinup player can play. Basically, you can do. You got way nicer looking text and fonts with images. It's just so much better, and it uses that score, and it can also work with real DMDs as well. That's actually a possibility. So you have really no excuse, to not want to have this because it'll work for everybody's setup now. It's a much more modern way, like for doing the scores, and this is nicely done, but it's also fairly simple. Like you can do some animations with the fonts and change it up and do different colors and all sorts of things. Have the video clips change. So I just wanted to show that real quick. So there you go. You have examples of Pinup player based only tables. You have examples of being able to use UltraDMD, and you have examples of PuP-DMD scoring as an option, and a PuP-Pack as an option, or UltraDMD as an option. So not all tables are the same, guys. So it's going to take a while. So if you are interested in that stuff, then you will need, after you're done this video and you've gone through and you set up all your tables and your Visual Pinball experience is perfect with no errors, no problems on any tables, then I recommend going to the install guide, and you'll eventually have made your the PuP wiki guide, as we mentioned. You should have already had all this installed, been down to this point here, have all your Visual Pinball stuff taken care of, and then you would come down here and you would install Pinup player. When that's all done and working and confirmed, then you can come to VPinBall and get a whole bunch of PuP-Packs for your tables. And and also in some cases, you got Scotty Wick's other table. Scotty Wick made Stranger Things, Stranger Edition, the one that table I just showed you, and his new table is the Leprechaun King, which is also PuP based only. And as you can see, pretty darn popular, man. So it has been out that long, and yeah, so clearly there's a lot of interest out there. So you old farts out there that think this is not for pinball, well, I suggest you buckle up and enjoy the ride, because you're missing out, guys. So I suggest you maybe open up your options a little bit. So there you go. So that's it. That's all I wanted to show you guys for that portion. So that way you guys are at least a little more familiar. And yeah, so that'll do for now for that portion. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up there, guys. We went through a ton of crap. Holy cow, this is one long video. Jeez. And, again, as I said a whole bunch of times already, this is not covering everything. So, you're going to have to be diligent and not just go by only my videos, as great as you may think they are. There's tons of more advanced stuff you can do, way more stuff that's involved with just visual pinball alone. So my recommendation is get to the forums. Come to VPinMAME. Great site, great community, loads of information about all sorts of virtual pinball stuff. Same thing with VP Universe. Great stuff there. Great community, tons of information, and of course VP forums. All of there's more than just this, but these are kind of like the big three for for visual pinball. So I highly recommend just try to be active, be respectful, be patient, because people can sometimes forget that if you're a new person to the hobby, you don't know everything, and you may not know the rules and the etiquette and everything else that's going on. So my recommendation is just kind of be a lurker, watch, read, soak up stuff, observe the date of the things that you're looking at, because sometimes things are outdated. That's why I did this video, so that way in 2019, at least now what's up to date. So try sticking with the Pinup install wiki, install links in the video I showed to help you out with that. Then go through like I did today in this video, and get your feet wet. Once you got things down solid, then you can branch out into Pinup Player and do cool PuP-Packs and other stuff. And then when you're done all that, maybe you'll branch out into like a front end. But one thing at a time. Some people just jump in and do way too many things all over the place when they don't actually have everything working correctly. And then they think the front end software is the problem, or Pinup Player is the problem, when in fact they didn't install and configure things before that for the essentials first. So that's why I did this in the order I did. So that way, hopefully you guys follow this and everything's rocking and good for you. So get onto the forums and, be active. Be part of the whole, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.